All right. Yeah. So, Matt, this is my co-host, Andrea Molinari. Oh, I'm getting my
Hello.
alarm reminding me of this.
Reminding you of the interview.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what's funny is like I have two computers and then my phone and then a tablet. And if they're all in the same room,
Oh, God.
they all are like connected to Google. So I get notified by every single one of them at the same time. Um, all I was saying though is just that he's a comic writer, comic editor. Been doing this for a long time. Matt and I met actually at a convention, and I think I was telling you, Andrea, whenever we were talking, was that just yesterday? Yeah, it was just yesterday. Whenever we were talking to Coffee Comics before that about conventions, at one of the conventions, it's not a Comic Con, but that's like a local I think they call it Archon Sci-Fi and Fantasy contest, not contest, but yeah, convention.
Yeah. Archon.
And
Yep.
Archon, yeah. And Matt was tabling next to me, and that's how we met. But so that's kind of all what on this show that we do, Matt, is basically I talk to more than just comic creators, and kind of what we talk about is sort of your career and then your insights into sort of your successes and failures and how we can learn from those in all the different aspects of what we're doing. And what's cool about you is because you're into the whole overall realm that we're into, but you come at it from a different angle because we're focused on most of the time we're just thinking about how do I make things work in the indie comic space, um without branching out and seeing like, well, that's why I like to have on people that make films or people that make video games and put them on Steam, because we can learn more about, well, how do you build your audience in this space, and I'll let you fill in what you consider it is that you do, because to me it's a bit more complex than just saying you write books about board games or that the books you write are associated with role playing games. But a lot of us don't know exactly what that means or how, so I'll let you take the floor and just fill us in. And before you get to that, you explain like your career in general before you got there, especially with you making the feature films and stuff that you did back in the day. We want to hear all of it.
Okay. Well, yes, my name is Matt Davids. Um, yes, going all the way back in time in the primordial days. I studied screenwriting at college and I did some internships at some TV stations and things like that. And I had my Hollywood dreams, I guess. And I ended up doing just some independent films, kind of guerrilla filmmaking is usually what people will call it. So we just made things around St. Louis or in some of the small towns around St. Louis. We would gather a few people together. I'd write something and we would shoot it. And since you don't need permits or anything here, we could get away with a lot of stuff. Um, and so, yeah, I made a few films, a lot of short films, and three feature-length films that won some awards at some film festivals. Never really kind of advanced beyond that stage, just kind of because we were always strapped for cash and trying to figure out what we were doing next and everything, and still trying to learn our craft. My last feature, though, it was a little interesting. I had a bit of a career change, and I went to Haiti, and I was working in an orphanage, and I was there during the earthquake in 2010, and so I had to return home. But then I went back, and I decided to shoot a movie in Haiti. So while I was back for a couple months, I kind of wrote up a screenplay. Independent movies usually, I just storyboard out a few scenes and get a general idea of what I needed to do. And I had met a couple of Haitian actors while I was there. So when I went back in the aftermath of the earthquake, I shot a movie with some Haitian actors, and it actually worked out pretty well. And so that film's called Craze. It's free on my website now, mattdavids.com. You can watch the whole thing there. Um, and so that was the last one that I had made. It won a couple of awards at some festivals, and so that was 2012. And then I really had kind of a career change after that. Um, I just needed to put food on the table, so I started. Uh, I actually got into working in search engine optimization and working on um, a blog for a company, and that kind of took me for that kind of opened my eyes to some things that I had been trying to do years ago. Like in the early 2000s, I was trying to blog, but I didn't know anything about it or anything, and everything was still evolving. And so working in SEO really kind of opened my eyes to what was going on in the world of online content and online content creation. And at one point, um, I think it was 2014, a friend of mine had passed away, and he was 36, and he left a wife and three little kids. And that was kind of a moment for me to start really thinking about stuff, right? That kind of, it always hits you when somebody close to you passes away and stuff. So and I had always had this love of tabletop role-playing games. And when I was a little kid, I started playing Dungeons and Dragons when I was 9 years old, and I had played it for many years. It kind of got me thinking about that again because my friend had played a game I had created. He was like a play tester of this game I had created. And at his funeral, I started seeing some people, I hadn't seen in 20 years, 25 years, and they were all like, "Hey, did you ever publish that game that we used to play?" And I was like, "No, I never, I never published the game. I mean, it was a dream, and I always tried to do it." But at his funeral, I was like, driving home, I was like, you know what? Maybe I should pull out that game and publish it, and I can dedicate it to him, to my friend who passed away because he helped me so much back in the day. So over the next few weeks, I kind of started looking around, and I found some old hard copies, and I found some old files on some hard drives and stuff, and of the role-playing game, the tabletop role-playing game. And it was unusable really, and for anybody else other than myself. So uh, that kind of started me looking into, how I could create a game and how I could do it more seriously. And that took me about a year or so. And then I had some rules, and I had a game, and I had a file, and I was like, well, now what? How do I publish this thing? And that is what really started me down the path of self-publishing my own tabletop role-playing game resources. And so I learned about Kindle Direct Publishing on Amazon. I uploaded the book there. And then I learned about another platform called DriveThruRPG, and I uploaded it there. And I sold a few copies. I sold it was something like 5 to 10 copies, and I made like $50. And I was like, wow, that this is kind of neat. I mean, this was a whole new experience for me. And I was like, well, if I made $50, I wonder if I could make $500. And so that really kind of started my progression there of just really looking into products and uploading more products onto DriveThruRPG and onto Amazon. And, and like I said, I was working in search engine optimization. So during the day, while I did a lot of keyword research, I don't know if anybody's familiar with all that stuff, but I would have to do keyword research. And some of that was looking through, spreadsheets of like 10,000 cells and all this stuff. And so we were allowed to listen to podcasts. So I would listen to a lot of internet marketing podcasts, and I was learning a lot of stuff. Obviously, I was using it for the business that I was working for, but I would come home at night and I would start using some of those things that I was learning from those podcasts on, releasing these tabletop role-playing game resources. And you know, one thing started leading to another, and in 2018, I released a book. It was about, I don't know, I think it was about my maybe my eighth or 10th or so book, and it was called The Book of Random Tables. And I released that book, and it took off, and I started actually making some money with this publishing. And because before then, I would make, $50 here or $100 there, or then I would spend some money on a website or something. And then, I wasn't really making any money,
It's a
even though,
wash at the end.
yeah, absolutely. And uh, really kind of starting in 2016 to that 2018, I was really working two full-time jobs. I was working my day job, and then I had really started going all in on my company called DiceGeeks. And I had really started, to really putting effort into it. And when that book hit in 2018, it was just kind of a real revelation. Like it just started making, the equivalent of a part-time job. Just one book was making that. And so I really just doubled down. I put out a sequel to the book, the Book of Random Tables 2, with more random tables that help game masters or dungeon masters play the tabletop role-playing games, help them come up with details and while they're playing the game, so they don't have to prep some stuff. And yeah, that really just took off from there. And like I said, I doubled down, and then Amazon introduced ads. That was the first time when they introduced their search ads in September of 2018. And at first it killed all my sales on Amazon, and I was like, oh well, this is great. But I decided to hop on the platform, and I started working with the Amazon ads. And I guess since I was one of the first ones in the tabletop role playing game category, really important keywords like Dungeons and Dragons and Dungeon Master and things like that were very cheap. And I was able to jump into that. And then by April 2019, I was able to go full time. I quit my day job, and I haven't looked back since then. And now I am well over 50 books in, and this is my full time gig. So that is kind of a rundown there.
That's amazing. There's a lot we can dive into on all of that because you know, I guess to keep where we're at now, I do want to talk about the SEO and sort of what specifically that means to people who don't know what it means to do keyword research because this is the kind of stuff that I, like you, was working with a guy that an SEO you call it a company, but it was two guys and then me. But and I was learning just like so much that I was like, if I just had a product of my own, I can rank on Google. Like I can make this happen. Like what do I want to do it with? And that ended up working for comics too. And then as I try to explain it to people, uh but before we get to that, I wanted to just explain to us because even now knowing because whenever I talk to you in person, you explain it to me. But for those who don't know, what are tabletop role playing games? How do they in general work? And why are your books of random tables like what is it? And then what makes you think like was that the first time it had been done? Like why did it take off to where like you have a full-time gig from essentially one hit book in this very sort of niche category, but it's like it's a huge industry. Obviously Dungeons and Dragons itself is a tabletop role-playing game.
Mhm.
But like what is it that you're actually writing and creating? And just fill us in a bit on those who are not familiar with that whole space.
Sure. So you mentioned obviously Dungeons and Dragons, which I'm sure is a household name that people have at least heard of the name of Dungeons and Dragons. Um, so a tabletop role-playing game is a game where players make a character usually on a sheet of paper or now in a digital format, and they will make a character. So this is a fictitious individual that they will play during the game, just like a person might play a character in a movie or a stage play. And so those players create those characters, and then there is usually a person in Dungeons and Dragons. It's called a dungeon master. More generally, it's called a game master. And this person runs the game. And so what that means is that the people with the characters, their characters need to be in a certain setting. They need to be confronted with certain challenges, and they need to have some type of story that they can interact with, have their characters interact with. And so the game master usually provides all of those things. So you could almost think about it if you've played a video game, like a video game, a role-playing game. It's like the players who have the characters, you create your characters, but then the game master's almost acting like the part of the computer, right? They're the ones who provide the setting and the story that you are going to interact with. And the thing with tabletop role-playing games is that they are really only bound by the creativity of the game master and the players who are sitting around the table. That once the story gets going, that the players can choose to go almost anywhere and do almost anything within the confines of the world that the game master has provided. Um, and some of the most classic, like I said, is Dungeons and Dragons, which I'm sure a lot of people have heard of. Um, some of the kind of typical idea is that you go into dungeons to look for treasures and you solve mysteries, and you are usually confronted with puzzles and monsters, and your characters then have certain skills and certain abilities that can be used to defeat those monsters, defeat those puzzles, and that is usually accomplished by rolling dice, many different sided dice. So there's four-sided dice, 8-sided, 10-sided, 20-sided dice, things which I'm sure some people have even maybe you've heard about, but if they haven't played, they haven't seen them. Um, so that is kind of a nutshell of a tabletop role-playing game. Now, my books, I know when I say books of random tables, that may mean absolutely nothing to somebody who hasn't played. But during a game of Dungeons and Dragons, if you are the dungeon master and you have, say, 3 to sometimes 6 or 7 or 8 players who are all controlling characters that are moving through a dungeon or a manor house or a castle, every time those characters enter a different room or a different space within one of those areas, a player can simply ask, like, what's in this room? I search this room. I I look in the closet of this room, or something like that. Or if the game master has described something saying there's a large dining table in the room, the players can then say, well, what's on the dining table? Are there silver candelabras on the dining table? They can start asking these questions, and sometimes it is very difficult for the dungeon master or the game master to keep up with those questions and to keep filling in interesting, details, items, or other things in the room that make the game engaging for the players. So my books of random tables could be something like items in a wizard's tower, items in a wine cellar, items on a dead goblin, or anything like that. And usually I make what's called a D100 table, which means you roll 2 10-sided dice. You get the number you can get a combination of numbers between 1 and 100. So I'll make 100 items, say for a wine cellar table. So if the dungeon master has their party and they go into a wine cellar and the characters are there and they say, well, I searched the wine cellar, the dungeon master can look at my table and roll dice on that table and get interesting items so they don't have to just sit there at the table and think of, oh my gosh, what could be in a wine cellar? Oh, well, there's wine in a wine cellar. Maybe you can't think of something too quickly off the top of your head. Well, my table will have all kinds of interesting things like a note hidden behind a wine vat or a silver hilted dagger, or something along those lines that will provide those interesting things for the dungeon masters so they don't have to do that before the session. Because usually, if you're not very good at coming up with a lot of creative things off the top of your head, what you will do is the night before the session, you'll have to fill those rooms. The dungeon master will have to fill all those rooms with items that are interesting. But the problem there is what if the players don't actually make it to that room or don't search that room? You just spent a lot of time filling that room with interesting items that your players will never see. So my books are a tool that you can use during the game to fill some rooms with interesting items without having to spend time prepping for those things. So I hope that kind of makes sense for people. I know if you haven't played, it's a little abstract. It is a super niche category because not even all game masters even use books of random tables.
No, that was a perfect expert. It fully makes sense now. It's like it's as if the game master is essentially writing or filling in the blanks of like the game and the challenges, and other people will invent their characters that are placed in that setting. So he might say, but like you're saying, the night before he might be like, we're in a cyberpunk world, their challenges are going to be one of these eight possibilities or something in this world or places that they can go. Are you, or is he actually like building or writing a map on like a sheet of paper, or is it truly like kind of out of thin air? Because if I remember right, there are places where it's kind of like it's like a map that's written out, right?
Yeah, yeah. There are a number of different styles of play, and so one style of play is to use a map, and there are a number of companies that design and sell maps, or the game themselves, like you mentioned. Say, there's a game called Cyberpunk Red, which is very popular. It's one of the most popular cyberpunk games, if not the most popular cyberpunk game. You can get, when you buy that game, it will come and it will show you maps of what's called Night City in there. Some people might be familiar of the video game Cyberpunk 2077, which it's based on that role playing game Cyberpunk Red. So um, some of those will come with maps, and then even in certain styles of play of Dungeons and Dragons, you may have a map of a ruined castle or a ruined dungeon, and you might even have little figures that you move around on the map. Now, another style of play is usually called theater of the mind, and that is where you just make up everything pretty much, and you keep it pretty loose until, say, okay, now it's your characters against a group of goblins, and then the dungeon master may just get out a whiteboard or, a small little whiteboard or a piece of paper and just draw out a quick little scene where you can have a battle so kind of everybody knows where they are. Now, of course, um, nowadays a lot of people play online through what's called a virtual tabletop. There's a site called Roll20, which is probably the most popular one, but there are some others. And so in there, the game master or the dungeon master can actually just upload a map, and you can put down tokens on there, virtually, and it just works uh, a physical map, but it is just represented there on your screen. And you then can play, obviously, with anybody around the world who can sign in into like almost like a Zoom type thing.
Yeah,
But
that's
instead of a
cool.
big screen, you have a map.
I was
Yeah.
I was wondering if people did that. I
Mhm.
apologize. I'm gonna let my cat out of this room. He's trying to get out.
I think that's one of the areas that's really changed the most. Like I played Dungeons and Dragons back in high school and then in college, and that was in the 80s when I was doing that. and loved it, absolutely loved it. But it's like everything was, there was so much preparation that needed to be done on paper. It was all on paper, and we had the maps and we had miniatures, and we had the figures that were our particular characters, and all the monsters and stuff like that. And that was one of the things that, just how much time it took to just set up the game before you could even get started. And that's the thing, is being able to use the digital resources really saves time and kind of gets you right into the game a lot faster. Also, it saves time in terms of the recording of so much information. Like what do you have on your character? It's so much easier to have it, to add to it as you go along. So,
Yeah, and there was actually kind of coming out of the 80s, the style of design back then, which continued on through the 90s, was very intensive, very complicated. It was starting to take, hours and hours just to make a character, like
yeah,
sometimes like 8 hours just to make a character, um, which was a pretty heavy investment. And then it was also an investment on the Dungeon Master, to really have, like multiple layers of a dungeon all planned out with all
yeah,
these encounters in every room. There was kind of a backlash to that in the early and mid 2000s, where the industry saw the rise of what's usually called a story game or a narrative game. And so those games have really now then in turn, right, influenced newer editions of Dungeons and Dragons to where they've made character creation a lot more simple and tried to cut out some of that. And of course, with D&D Beyond .com, you can just go in and make a digital character and it does all the math behind it. And, you just pick, your abilities and resource, and your roll your attributes all there with virtual dice and everything like that. So it cuts out a lot of that. The issue is though with Dungeon Masters, it almost just moves more prep though into the digital realm, because
yeah,
now you can set up a map, but you can also put dynamic lighting on it. So depending on where your character's tokens are, that part of the map will, if they can't see it, it'll be black. And but you have to put all this stuff in, and so there is still a lot of prep on the game master. And actually, I wrote a book called The No Prep Game Master to try to get people to realize that they don't have to spend a lot of this time, prepping, that they can, just be talking with some friends if you're hanging out. And if somebody says, hey, why don't we play Dungeons and Dragons, or why don't we play something, you can just jump in and start playing, and without feeling that pressure, because I think it got too much there for a while.
yeah.
So whenever someone like you're saying, the very first way you got into this was you wrote a tabletop role-playing game. What is it that you're actually writing? Like, what is it that makes the game the game? Like the IP? Is it storylines? Is it sort of options for the challenges? Or like what is it that actually goes into if I wanted to write a game like I remember seeing, is it Sith? That was like a big one a few years ago. Where it was sort of like
Mm.
a early America, like frontier, but there were sort of these giant machines or like some kind of like. I'm pretty sure that was a tabletop role playing game. I remember seeing like in stores, in comic shops and stuff like that. Um, well, so like what goes into it from like what was your game? What was that storyline?
Yeah, my game, it's called Anarchy, and it was a post-apocalyptic kind of after, post-nuke kind of setting. And what I actually ended up doing was, um, I was struggling so much with rules. Like I had ideas for my setting, but I was struggling so much with rules back in 2014, 2015, that there was an old game that came out in 1987, which was the Star Wars role-playing game by a company back then called West End Games. And I bought that when, it was 1987. I was like 14 years old. And I played that game so much that I knew the rules like by heart. And when they, like in the early 2000s, that company went out of business, they released the rules to that system for free in a package that's called the Open D6 system. And so actually I just took that system because you can, and of course you give credit and stuff like that, but I took those rules, they had all the rules, and I just adapted my game to those rules since I knew the rules so well. And then I just put on there, compatible with the Open D6 system and whatever other requirements they had for the system. And I just used that to publish the game. And I mean, it sounds, it sounds kind of, uh, kind of like this, smooth process or whatever. But like when I released that first game, it was awful. Like I did not understand, like, I mean, of course it was the end of 2015. So like I didn't understand like stock images at the time. I didn't uh I ran it through, I swear I ran it through spell checks, but it was like riddled with errors like all over the place. Um I mean, I only got to play test it really maybe, 5 or 6 times, before I published it. So there were some holes in the system. There were things like, I think I alluded to it a little bit, like I knew how to run the game because it was all in my head. And that process of translating that into something else that a person who has never heard of this game or this setting can read and then run is a huge thing, right? Because if I'm running the game, I can just make up stuff and I can go off on the fly and I can make up rules even, if I'm doing this stuff. But to put all that into writing and really translate it for somebody else to just read and understand is very difficult. And that first one was a mess. I ended up, I think it was 2017. I cleaned it all up and I released it, as a cleaned up version. Back then because it was just so bad. And I had learned then about stock images. So I have a really, I put a nice cover on it and stuff now. But so that's what I did at the beginning. Of course, an original tabletop system is, I mean, that's a big sell for people if they are into Dungeons and Dragons or they're into the second most popular game, uh, tabletop role playing game is called Pathfinder, which is actually just an older version of Dungeons and Dragons. They've finally now kind of moved away from some of that, and are really exploring their own rules now. But essentially, just until a few years ago, it was just an older version of D&D because people wanted to play the older version of D&D. And you know, it's a big investment to ask somebody to buy a new role-playing game system. That's why when I released that one, I said I sold a few copies. I've sold a few more. I sell some of the books at conventions when I can talk to people or I meet people who like the D6 system and they're like, "Oh, that's what I play. I play the D6 system from the old West End Star Wars game. I'll check this book out." Um, that did not make me go full time, right? But it did teach me how to start really putting my thoughts together into a book, and it taught me how to really walk through the whole publishing process on Amazon and on Drive Through RPG. So that book, even though it took me a long time to make and it doesn't really sell very well, actually taught me how to begin this whole business that I'm in now.
No, yeah. You got to start somewhere. I think for me, it was, I just had to learn how to, and it seems simple in theory. And then even now, after doing it, you think like it's easy, but just writing and publishing a book on Amazon, you have to go through those motions of writing it, uploading it. Like you said, you don't even know how to make a cover, what images are too big, too small, the actual layout of everything. And that's like the simplest form of publishing to then try to do it as a board game. Yeah, that you learned everything. And then the whole back end marketing. Um, Well, let's now jump into a bit of I guess, sort of the digital marketing, or what are the key components you would say to, like, what is keyword search, and like how did you rank on Amazon whenever you were saying D&D was you were new to the space, but you're like, those are valuable. Like, what does that mean to the layman's terms, and how can we take that and like use that as actual tools for us to grow our books and stuff like that? Like, what is it that you were doing that we can mimic?
Yeah, well, some of the biggest things that I really realized on Amazon was the importance of putting certain types of keywords within my product description so that, uh, you know, and also my title. That's why I called it the Book of Random Tables. And then I have a subtitle that talks about fantasy tabletop role playing games. So to get those keywords in there that people are, if people are searching for a fantasy tabletop role playing game resource, that mine should come up when they do that. Now, it was totally different when I started publishing my books, and I know that's what everybody says, but um, even just being, 10 or 8 or 6 years ago, things have changed so much on Amazon that I mean it's hard to even explain how much things have changed and
Yeah.
how much more competition I have. Like when I started publishing my books, there was like only one or two other independent publishers within the Dungeons and Dragons and Pathfinder and say Shadowrun or some of these other game categories. There was only like one or two. Like I was like the third one. Um, well, now all the big five publishers, since Dungeons and Dragons, the 2014 edition of Dungeons and Dragons exploded kind of around 2016. Um, and its popularity, the big five publishers have now all launched imprints that put out tabletop role-playing game resources, and their books are all in the categories where I had, my Book of Random Tables, that first one that I had published that actually sold more than just a few copies. In 2018, that made it to like, it was like 2,500 and some in Amazon store, right? So there was only 2,500 and some books selling more than my book was selling. Um, which it was phenomenal, right? It like blew my mind that I could be, selling that many books just with that one book. However, now that the big five publishers have moved into the space, it is very difficult um, to get my books to rank, you know,
Yeah.
with them because, well, I mean, they just have so many resources. So they've started partnering with you know, Dungeons and Dragons YouTubers that have 500,000 followers, and they'll pay them to write a forward for the book, and then they put out an ad, and YouTube drives so much it drives so much business to Amazon into a book that it's really hard for me, like a small creator, to keep up anymore. Even with the Amazon ads, like I said, when they first launched in September of 2018, I had now I worked on the organic side at a company, as my day job, but I was familiar with some of the paid kind of side. I was able to do the keyword research and just get some of my terms like, you know, Dungeons and Dragons, tabletop, role-playing games, some of those broad terms, and I was able to get them down into what's usually called a long tail. So Dungeons and Dragon resources, Dungeons and Dragons books, some more even long tail keywords there. And I was able to rank very well in the new ad platforms. But now that more people have moved into the platform, a keyword back then, say even Dungeons and Dragons was costing me, maybe barely 25 cents a click. Now the keyword Dungeons and Dragons could cost me, $2, $3, which uh, kind of kills the whole margins of books because the book
Yeah.
margin is so small, or so slim. And then, of course, even Amazon has changed their royalty structure, so and their printing costs have gone up, so I make less money on those sides as well. So somebody diving in right now into the Amazon ad platform, it's going to be very difficult, and you're going to have to spend a lot of money. You're going to have to really nail your market. You really need to know exactly what your book does to capture some of those long tail keywords. If a person's typing very specific keywords, you need to know exactly what your book is about and to try to capture those. Because like now trying to do something like cyberpunk or a cyberpunk role-playing game, is going to be very expensive, and it's going to be very difficult because the other people are kind of ruling those categories. So the business has changed so much in these past 10 years or 8 years. It's just yeah, I mean, it's a challenge every day, and I'm still trying to keep up with my ads and that now, because well, now they're adding AI into the ad platform, so everything's changing all the time, and the dashboard's changing all the time, so it's very hard to keep up. And then, like I said, so much competition has moved into the categories. It's becoming harder and harder for me to rank on Amazon. So that's why I use the other platform, Drive Through RPG, which is a third party marketplace, geared for tabletop role playing games. So you have a lot of hardcore fans there. I use that platform to really generate a lot of my business through there as well.
Do you make any efforts to get your books into retail shops?
Yeah, it's this has been something that when I upload them to Amazon, what I had started doing, there is a feature through Amazon called expanded distribution. And what that actually does is it sends your book then to a large company called Ingram. If you've heard of Ingram, a lot of people don't know Ingram, but if you have books in your house, probably 80% of them were printed by Ingram. Ingram is a huge printer of books, massive global company. Um, and Ingram sends out catalogs to, retail stores. So it's a wholesaler print books to, to bookstores and game stores all around the world. So if my books, most of them are through, I use the expanded distribution on Amazon to go into Ingram. So you can find my books at Walmart and Barnes and Nobles and all that stuff, usually on their website, right? Not stocked. Now, I've done some other efforts to get my books out, like emailing, 500 or 600 game stores and seeing if they would like to, put it on the shelves. Um, and that's been kind of I've had mixed results with that, but if the game store uses Ingram as one of their distributors, which some do, they are able to buy my books. So I know there are a number of comic book shops and role playing game stores that do stock my books because they use Ingram as a distributor. So that's been one thing there. Also, people have contacted me independently and said, can you offer me a better deal? And I'm like, sure. And so I'll just send them to I'll just send them to them through, just ordering order copies off Amazon. And I've done that a couple times for a game shop. Um, and so, yeah, my books are available really around the world. That's
Everywhere.
what's amazing with um, one of the innovations that seems like it would get more press, but a lot of people don't talk about it. It's the print on demand. Uh, Really just being able to upload my book to Amazon and then them only printing it when it makes a sale is huge, right? Because if you can just imagine, and maybe you don't have to, but because it was a common thing, even what, 15 years ago, if you published an independent book, what did you have to do? You had to order like 5,000 copies of it to get it
Yeah.
to a
Yeah.
print price that made sense for you to make money on if you're selling it at retail. But what do normal people do with 5,000 books, right? You'd have to put them in your basement or your garage.
Mhm.
And then, of course, that outlay of cost, that would have probably cost you 12 to $15,000 to get those 5,000 books, which obviously a lot of people don't have laying around as discretionary income. So the print on demand has revolutionized that space to where you can just write a book, upload it to Amazon or Ingram. Now they have their own platform called Ingram Spark, which you can go right through them and upload on their platform as well. And you can just upload your book and you don't have to keep inventory. You don't have to keep all that. You don't have to spend $15,000 and then have pallets of books delivered to your house that'll sit in your garage or your basement that then you have to figure out how to sell and get in front of people, right? You have access to a marketplace with like how many customers does Amazon have? Like 800 million customers or whatever it is. I mean, you have potential access to that many people on a marketplace. Um, and your fee for, and your cost for putting together a book and uploading Amazon can be zero if you do the writing and layout and cover design yourself and you get free images that are now all over online that say they're free and can be used in any way. You could make a book for zero cost other than your time and upload it to Amazon and start selling it without any outlay of cash. And that's amazing.
I did not know that they had that expanded distribution. I had known about Ingram Spark, but I had always thought that you had to go exclusive with them. I didn't know that you could go through Amazon as well, especially from the Amazon website where they allow you to then go, because then you can get into, yeah, Barnes and Noble, their catalog. I am curious, do you know what your book looks like in the catalog? Like, what is it that the retailers are seeing? Like, is there any way to stand out in the catalog? Like, whenever you upload to Ingram or to Amazon in general, as far as distribution, what does it look
Mhm.
like on the other end? Do you know?
I have no idea.
Okay, yeah.
um,
Because like
I
without
would,
you saying you
yeah,
email the retail shops and then they have the ability to buy it. I was wondering if you can
yeah,
see how many
no.
organic retailers just saw you in the catalog and were like, "Oh, okay."
No, I don't. I would have to be an approved like Ingram books shop seller, which
Yeah, I
obviously I'm
got you.
not.
Yeah.
And nobody is showing me theirs or whatever. So,
I know what they look like in the comic catalogs and
oh, okay.
yeah, they're just unless you pay to be to be featured or something.
Yeah.
You're just another blip in a gigantic book of
Yeah.
endless things. And I'm
Yeah.
sure whenever, like the Ingram catalog has to just be insane. Like there's no way someone could go through it. But that's what's cool about your space, our space, is that, like you're saying, retailers, what they do is this. They you sell games. So like they're on the lookout. You're in the same community. So of course they would reach out and say like, hey, if I can
Mhm.
sell these or if you can sell them to me at, excuse me, half price, um, then they can profit from them or whatever.
Yeah. And it's kind of a struggle on Ingram Spark because um things with the book industry, I'm sure you're familiar, is that if with the traditional publishing, retailers have the option, if books don't sell, they have the option to return them to they have them to the publisher, which I cannot do, right? I cannot accept books back and I cannot issue like refunds to that regard if somebody buys, a few hundred books and then they only sold 50. I cannot buy those books back from them. Of course, the big five publishers can do that, and that's been a part of traditional publishing for a long time. So you have to then mark on Ingram Spark that it's like no returns, no, and once you do that, that then just narrows down
Yeah.
what stores are going to buy from you and also the kind of the percentage of what Ingram Spark is, what percentage of royalty or what percentage that you're able to sell your wholesale at. Sometimes it just the print on demand is fantastic for not keeping inventory, but once you start trying to sell wholesale, you might be paying, way too much for a book that, the retailer is going to want it for less than I can pay for it, if we're talking about if I'm using print on demand to try to fill their
Yeah,
thing.
the
Now,
math just
you know,
isn't there. They want it for
yeah,
less than your print, or like they wanted a printing cost.
yeah,
Do you know,
almost, yeah.
Andrea, how many people in comics have tried to sell their graphic novels through Ingram Spark that you know of? And like, because I feel like I've thought about this before and I've talked to other people and they're like, it just doesn't work. I know that I don't think they like even have the option to sell floppy comics. So, but and then even with graphic novels, I can't remember if it's like a formatting issue or if there's something that like holds people back to where I'm like
And
why aren't
I
we trying to get into Barnes and Noble through that self or like through that method? Do you know anybody that's tried that and what their hangups were?
Okay, so I'll start back. This is years ago when I was an editor with Caliber Comics. And it's a small publisher based out of Michigan. It's where you got The Crow originally was published with that, and a number of fairly well-known creators, Brian Michael Bendis, Ed Brubaker, David Mack, among them, that came out of that. When I was with them, this would have been like 2015 to 2020. And one of the things that they did is this print on demand thing with Amazon. Now, the problem that we ran into, and this is what I was going to ask you, Matt, about, we ran into problems with the quality of the printing for the images because of graphic novels. So, the images and them having crisp, clean print of those images was really important. And what I had found originally was that the quality was not good. It was kind of blurry. And I just told my boss, I said, "Are you seeing these books that are coming out?" Because he would have books printed on demand and then sent to me. I said, "You need to see these books because they're not good." Now, apparently he got on the phone with them and raised some hell and the quality suddenly got better, you know. So I don't know what was it. It might have been, an anecdotal issue there, but I don't know how it is now with Ingram Sparks. I was talking with somebody this weekend about that. And they do their graphic novels through there, and apparently you can do floppies with Ingram, but he said something along the lines that the pricing was hard to make it work, So but that's all I know. I don't have direct experience with
That
Ingram.
that
But I like
sounds
the
right.
idea that's one of the things I wanted to follow up with you, Matt, is I'm assuming that your books, these are like D&D manuals that I remember back in the day. So I'm tell me if I'm right. You have your prose where it's descriptive and stuff like that. You have tables in there, like the rolling tables and stuff like that. Plus, you have images in there of characters and weapons and things like that. How have you been pleased with the quality of how those books look when they're print on demand? Are there good quality images?
Yeah, the quality for me has been quite good.
Mm,
Um, I know now that they have moved into hardbacks.
mm,
Um, there has been a little knock on, on print on demand, for usually on some of the hardback quality.
mm.
Usually not images. I haven't really had a problem with my images. Now, my books aren't as image heavy as a comic book or a graphic
Right,
novel. I
right.
could only imagine and how important that is for a graphic novel or a comic book to have clean images. I can only imagine. Um, Usually the issue. Um, I mean, most of my books are like the just the standard glue spine back. Those books I've never really had a problem with printing quality like ever unless I made some type of mistake or something. So I've never had really a printing quality issue with those. The hardback sometimes um the Amazon ones, and then I also get some hardbacks printed through Ingram Spark through um actually it's kind of a daisy chain. So like uh Drive Through RPG, I can upload my hardback books there. They use a system called Lightning Source, which is actually owned by Ingram, to so it's Ingram printing the hardback books. Sometimes those books, the spine, usually it's the spine, the pages, sometimes there can be an issue with the pages seeming to be a little iffy in the binding there. But I mean, overall, the quality is very good. And I know there are some small tabletop role-playing game companies that just refuse to use the print on demand because of some of those uh, quality issues there. But to me, I mean, I see some of these, companies, or I'll talk to some people, or I'll email with some people or something, and it's just like I see some of these companies that, now some of them have their system and they get their print runs and they have it all down and stuff, but it's like some of these companies, it's just like you're leaving so much money on the table by not just going through print on demand. Because I mean, I'll hop on Drive Through RPG sometimes and I'll see an awesome looking book and they'll have their PDF there and I'll be like, "Oh, I actually want to hold this book because it looks really nice." Well, there aren't any available because they had a print run of several thousand and they sold out of them last year. And so there are no hardbacks
Yeah.
available. There's no print available. And it's just like, I mean, to me, it just seems like they're just leaving, it's like they lost the customer there, at least from my view, because
Yeah.
I was going to buy one. But so I don't know. I don't think it's, and I'm sure it's going to get better and better each
Sure.
year with the quality. But I mean, I haven't had a problem. I still see some other, smaller companies saying they will not use it. Um, I mean, obviously, if you have a company and you have cash to work with, doing a print run might be, more advantageous for you, especially if you do a lot of conventions and you have a built up audience already and you have warehousing and everything worked out. Like I've looked into it, but it is such a complex chain of things that you need to have. Like if you can't store, if you don't have a place to store 10,000 books, then you're going to have to rent warehouse space. And then and it just kind of goes on and on and on. So I think for some small companies, they would be better off if they embrace the print on demand. But like I said, every once in a while, I will see, some of the spines come back that aren't the best. And I mean, I could only imagine, what it might have been looking like for a few years ago with graphic
Yeah.
novels, but yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that there's real value in the print on demand. I mean, it's for all the reasons that you stipulated. Because I certainly deal with that. I do go to do a lot of conventions. I literally spent 20 hours on the road driving, from Florida to Toledo this last weekend. Um, and you're taking the books with you, or you're shipping them, depending on the circumstance. Um, it's it's tough because you're constantly trying to figure out how do you get a book at a decent price that there's a margin there for you, you know. Um, and it's certainly not going to be. I'm not printing in the quantities like the 10,000 copies. Just can't. It's ridiculous. 500 is what I do. I'll do a run of 500. Um, but even then, it's still you have to have. I have a storage facility where I put the books and stuff like that because my wife would hate me. I mean, she
Yep.
may actually hate me anyway, but you know, so you run into those problems with the books. I think ideally it would be good if you could find a sweet spot where you have some on hand. I've actually found a printer that I'm looking into in China that allows you to do smaller runs like the 500.
Mhm.
And what's interesting is within the 500, they'll actually allow you to do multiple covers, which is a thing for us, not so much with what you're doing. Um, and so I guess it's that, as this whole reality evolves, you know, seeing how the marketplace evolves around it. The quality, certainly getting good quality from that print on demand is outstanding. That's really good because it's so much easier.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to start my business
Mm.
if I would have had to buy. I mean, even if I had bought 500 copies of my first game, I don't know if I don't think it's sold 500 copies, right now, so because that wasn't the product that people just really wanted. So
Sure.
I couldn't be able to do this trial and error and trying to check the market and see what sells with
Yeah,
having to
definitely.
buy, you know, uh, large print runs or anything like that.
I was going to ask, with the work that do you do any Kickstarters? Do you do crowdfunding of any kind? Because I would think that you would have a healthy following of people that would love your work and, want to support it. I mean, I'm thinking both of my sons. I have two sons, 32 and 25, and they both love Dungeons and Dragons, and they both play regularly. Like,
Yeah.
so I know they'd love it.
Yeah. Send them over to dicegeeks.com.
I will. I most definitely will. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. I have not done a Kickstarter yet. This is probably where I'm struggling and falling down kind of on some things that where um uh I I probably definitely should do a Kickstarter. However, um it's it is I don't know. I guess it's just been for me. It's just like I read about it. I've emailed a few people about it. I've watched some seminars online about it from people even at Kickstarter and stuff like. And um, to me, and I've also known a few people who've done some smaller Kickstarters and they've gotten themselves into big trouble because they didn't have the product done. They didn't have the book done. Um, and they got into trouble, like, not fulfilling on time and certain things like that. Um, Now the model in the industry seems to be a lot of the uh, YouTubers who talk about tabletop role-playing games, a lot of the ones that have 100,000, 200, 400,000 followers, they have been releasing Kickstarters and they're able to drive quite a few people to them. And um, there have been several, independent tabletop role-playing games that have crossed into 2 million, 3 million, 4, 5 million even on Kickstarter, which kind of blows my mind.
That's awesome.
Um, like I don't know. At this point, at this stage, I can't even comprehend, running a Kickstarter that would make, more than $100,000, let alone, let alone $5 million. Um, Now they have specific things, that they do that based on some of, my research into what they're doing, they hire a company that's going to take 30% or more of the revenue of the Kickstarter. And that company puts together a total marketing plan of paid ads, reaching out to other YouTubers. They also start a plan of releasing videos. Of course, like I said, a lot of them have followings over 100,000 or more on YouTube. So they come out with these plans and they really just hit it, as hard as possible to really just go after that, maximize that top number as
Yeah.
much as they can, because then obviously once you're even crossing into raising 100 or $200,000, you start getting like mainstream media picking up the news story. Like
Sure.
Forbes magazine will run a story and say, "Hey, look at this little game company has raised $3 million on
Yeah.
Kickstarter." Well, of course, that just sends more people to your Kickstarter page. So that's really at the moment just really outside of me even thinking about doing. I've talked to some people who've done some smaller ones, who've set a small goal of like $1,000 and then they've raised seven or they've raised $14,000. um and usually their kind of model is to have the book done already, have everything done, and then just, put out a small, just ask for a very small, $1,000 and then, try to hit their campaign so it'll fund and they'll be able to get the books and stuff to people. But I have not done that yet. Um, I do feel like I am missing, kind of a piece there. But
Well, I
it's
think the games
I
do
don't know.
very well. Like I have a buddy of mine who's a huge gamer, and he buys all the like every we get together every Thanksgiving, that week, and we play games all that time that we're together, and all these amazing games that he gets. I asked him where you get them. Oh, I got them on Kickstarter. Just
Yeah.
supported them, and they sent this game to me. I think that's a real opportunity, and I would tell you, don't be afraid to start with a small one. Although, to be honest with you, if you had access to talk to one of those companies that does the big ones and they want 30%, hell, if you're gonna get me $2 million, you can have 30%. I'll give you a big wet kiss too. I
Yeah.
mean, I'll be happy to do it. If they can deliver that, they're worthy
Yeah.
of that 30% of whatever that chunk is. I mean,
Yeah.
if it was 100,000, it'd be worth it too, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And then Kickstarter takes something like 15
they
to
do.
20% as well.
Oh, no, no, it's not that much.
It's not that much?
No,
Oh,
no.
I thought I
What is
had
it,
heard
six,
Yeah,
eight, something like that? I
8.
I do
Oh, okay.
small Kickstarters.
Oh,
So
okay. So
mine
you've
are
done them.
5 to 7,000.
Oh,
Like,
okay.
yeah. I mean,
Okay.
they're not huge, but
Oh,
they're
okay.
successful, and that's how those print runs of the 500. That's how it
Yep.
gets funded.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
well,
Um,
that's what the whole indie comic empire brand that I have here is it kind of stems from the idea that we start with one little IP, a comic book that we can often crowdfund through Kickstarter, and that can start a whole empire of branching out into different mediums.
yeah,
But what I tell people is like Kickstarter is just another pre-order platform. It's just a place where you can one is just funnel traffic to that for a limited time. But the reason it's beneficial is because outside of the traditional comic distribution market where there's stores looking at catalogs, there's a huge market for both tabletop games and comics, and
yeah,
kind of just, especially in our like little independent creator space, it's a huge market, and that's why certain people are making millions. But even as an independent, it's just a place where that's where the people are at.
right,
It's like almost no different from just throwing it up on Facebook and driving traffic to your website. But really, you would be already like you already have the products on your website.
yeah,
You just instead of uploading them to your website, do a limited window where you offer the main product, and then you have to come up with other ancillary things to make it more interesting and more beneficial and some kind of perks. But that's where people partner with sort of experts to figure out that little stuff, and then you're just hiring someone to fulfill. When you're working with the numbers that you're probably going to work at, to where it's like when you start earning and you get more than 300 backers, it's too much work for you to deal with. So that's where you start to partner with other companies to deal with fulfillment and distribution and even like marketing or whatever, to where it is worth it to be like you take 30% to deal with this kind of stuff. um it's the main model for independent comic creators that don't go through the traditional publisher market. And then, but that's what I was gonna then ask you, Matt, to kind of close is like I then argue, with us in the comic space, we very rarely, unless you're even like top 10 comic writer, comic artist, it's hard for you to make a full-time living just with your one specific skill set. You have to branch into these other mediums. Even we were just talking to a few, high-level creators, they have to rely on not just writing comic books, but getting option deals for it to turn into films, branching into, your characters on, releasing a tabletop game of your IP or something like that. So what is sort of your business model? How many conventions do you go to? How much is physical sales? How much is your own website? How much is the other platforms? Not specific numbers, but sort of just like a pie chart of what are all your revenue streams and what's your kind of just like monthly routine of what you do as a I mean, you're a golden child of what we all want to become. Someone that's a full-time creates in the world
Mhm.
of make believe. You literally just make things up for a living. You know,
Mhm.
that for people to play games. It's a dream come true. How so how do you make that all work in the sort of step by step of that?
Yeah, it's like I've mentioned, so I have sales that come from Amazon. I have sales that come from Drive-Through RPG. Those would be two of my biggest drivers. Now, I do offer, my books on my website, but that is very small compared to Drive-Through RPG and to what I can do on Amazon. Um, what I think, what I think people miss is that you you have to have an audience to sell to, right? When I when I released my first book, my game Anarchy, and at the end of 2015, um, it's like a miracle that I sold 5 copies or whatever it was. Like that is, uh, and like I didn't sell them on Amazon. I sold them on Drive-Through RPG. Like that is just like, um, if you don't have an audience to sell to, um, you you are, you're basically stuck, right? And I have now heard some, horror stories, and I have, gotten emails from people and things, because on Drive-Through RPG, with all the amount of titles of role-playing games that are uploaded onto there, and resources and maps and all the other stuff that's uploaded on there, it is something like 92 or 94% or something like that of the products fewer than 50 copies, right? It's like
Sounds
90
right.
some. Now, I just released a book called The Prepared Player. I just released that book as we're recording now. I just released that book on Thursday. It crossed 50 copies by 3 p.m. on Thursday afternoon, right? Um, because I have an audience to sell to. I can send out an email on Drive-Through RPG to my past customers. And I can also send out an email to my email list, which I have an email list that just crossed 10,000 subscribers.
Well done.
So I can send that book out to those people, and the main people that know my work and are interested, they're just going to grab it. They're just going to pick it up those first few days. Um, and I think that's a piece that people just absolutely miss, is that, um, when I was starting, right, I released my first book, Anarchy. Well, it didn't sell. Well, then I realized something, listening to these marketing podcasts while I was doing my day job. Um, and it's very simple. And it is, you release something for free in exchange for somebody's email address. Um, and that is really all there is to it. And then you try to get that free thing in front of as many people as you can, whether that means posting on Reddit, that means posting in forums, wherever you can, you try to get that free thing in front of people, and in exchange for that email address. And on Drive-Through RPG is a great platform because they allow you to email your past customers, which is amazing. I wish Amazon would do that, but they don't. um, because that's Amazon's customer, is not your customer. Um, so between my email list on Drive-Through RPG and my personal DiceGeeks email address, I was able to email over 30,000 people on Thursday when I released my book. So, I think that is a piece that people miss, because I know there's some resistance to things where people are like, well, I don't want to give work away for free and all this stuff, and it devalues the work. And I can understand that to a degree. But if people like your stuff, if they like what you're producing, they're going to buy it. And like that first book that I was telling you about, the Book of Random Tables, um, that I released in 2018, all the entire year of 2017, I would make those random tables, and I released every single one of those tables for free. And people can download those, and I got a lot of email addresses. I got a lot of downloads on DriveThruRPG through those. And I just took those tables, those 25 tables that were free, and put them into a book, and people still bought the book because it is in a better format. It's convenient to have them all together. It's also, to get the paperback is that you can have as a resource at the table. A lot of people are work nowadays on computers all day, and when they're running their game with their buddies at home, they don't want to look at a screen, so they have a book they can hold. Um, Doing things like that, offering things for free in exchange for a way to contact somebody later is is like the tool to build your online business. You have to have some kind of fans to reach out to. Now you can do it in a number of ways. You can do it through YouTube videos, right? Like I mentioned, those some of those creators who have 200,000 subscribers on YouTube. Well, when they release a product, it goes out to a lot of people. They get it sent out to a lot of people. And those YouTube videos, you release those for free. It's content that's released for free in exchange for a way to contact somebody. Um, and now, getting somebody's email address is better, but still, if you have, 100,000 followers on YouTube, even if you had 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, that is a huge amount of people who are going to see your products that you're releasing. So um, that is still, one of the main ways that I attract people into kind of my flywheel is you give away free stuff in exchange for an email address. And then when you release a paid product, you email them. And that is really how I start. So all my pieces, like I said, I have Amazon. My books are on Amazon. They're on DriveThruRPG. I have the DiceGeeks newsletter, which is I just use Substack for nowadays. And people can subscribe to that. And I send out an episode an issue every Friday, just talking about cool stuff with, tabletop role-playing games, or I talk about movies a lot since I have a history with movies. I talk about how to use movies to get situations and scenes in your games. And then on the days that I release a book, I will mention the book in there. And it has been amazing. It has been an amazing piece. And like you said, I know um, that I rarely talk to somebody who gets to do this full time. So I'm very appreciative that I get to, but um, it is, it's a lot of work. And like I said, I'm still trying to keep up with Amazon ads because they keep changing so much, and the business changes and competition is swooping in, and they have more resources than I do. So I have to keep moving. But now, since I've really been doing this for 10 years now, that I have, a core group of people. When I release something, when I release a book, I know it will sell, depending on, what kind of subject matter it is, and um, that I know it'll sell. And that keeps me going. And um, also, I mean, like I was saying earlier, like knowing when I released my game Anarchy, and it hasn't really sold very much even now, over the years, understanding who your customer is so important that when I play tabletop role-playing games and when I'm the game master, I use random tables. And I would use random tables a lot. I would use them so much, I would make random tables for me to use in my home game.
Hmm.
And so I was like, after a couple of years of doing this, trying to put out role playing games, full role playing games, or tabletop settings, I was like, if I use random tables when I'm running games, I bet you there's a lot of people who use random tables when they're running games, and I bet you they don't want to sit there and make them because they have a family, they have a full-time job, they have all these things that they're dealing with, and they don't want to, spend that time to make the table. I can make the table, and just for a few bucks, you can have my tables, and that will take that off. That will take all that pressure off, but you get to use the table. So I kind of knew that those tables were an interesting idea. And then by testing them, by releasing some for free, I started seeing that I was getting downloads, especially on Drive-Thru RPG. Like one was uh, supplies in an alchemist lab, like just alchemy, an alchemist lab's supplies. That one in like 2 or 3 weeks got like 6,000 downloads on Drive-Thru RPG. So I was like, man, people wanted to see that table, and it got a lot of downloads. So um, I had this idea then that, oh, people want the random tables. So when I put them together, 25 tables in a book, and released it, um, that it was kind of a hit product, but it took, from 2014 to 2018 to kind of put it all together and to figure out that, like, this is a product that I think people are going to want, and all the while building up those email addresses by releasing free things. Um, so those are kind of my pieces. Now I'm in a position where I can do some paid ads. So I'll do some Facebook ads, drive people to my newsletter through Facebook, or drive people to the RPG, the Drive-Thru RPG page, through some paid ads and stuff. But um, other than the Amazon ads that I've been doing since 2018. But so that's pretty much, it. And I have also now, I mean, I have about 45 of random table books where I cover genres, not only fantasy, but I cover science fiction, cyberpunk, steampunk. I've released, kind of, ones for Call of Cthulhu, and that can be used for that game as well. So I've tried to cover the market to say, hey, if you want random tables, you come to me, and you come to DiceGeeks, you get your random tables here. And if you're playing the old Traveler game, or a Star Trek game, or Dungeons and Dragons, or Pathfinder, or you're playing a Victorian steampunk game that I've never heard of, I have a book that will give you some random tables that will take some of your prep time and, away from you, and also give you some really cool stuff that you can put into your games.
Perfect. I feel like there's still a whole lot more I want to ask you, but we're over an hour now, so we'll save it for a part two because I still want to get into the movies, a bit more about sort of the mechanics of the games, and like, do you host events, and like more about sort of physical aspects of building them and stuff like that. But is there, so that's the other thing, is like, if you have like just such a model that works, you're mainly just like just driving traffic to the model where people are already getting them through the methods, you know. It's not so much as like expanding to this market here or this market there. It's like you have your market. You've now, and now it's just about, it's kind of like the perfect, we talk about in writing, is like you just have to write. Like the audience is there, you just have to keep it going. So it's just kind of just feeding the machine. Um, but do you have anything new that's coming out that we can shout out to, or other than dicegeeks.com, or maybe mattdavids.com? Where do you want us to send traffic to?
Yeah, I just released a game called The Prepared Player. It's a companion to my No Prep Game Master book. The Prepared Player gives advice for people who play the role-playing games. Usually the books are, advice books are focused on the game master or the dungeon master, because usually the dungeon master, the game master is the one who is most engaged with the game. They're trying to put together the game. They want to play a certain game. They want to have a setting. So I've released the prepared player, um, which gives advice to the players. I also have the No Prep Game Master second edition, which I released last May, which has been doing really well on DriveThruRPG and on Amazon. That is my advice for game masters who feel like they're overwhelmed or now have reached a certain stage in their life where, they have a job, they have children, they have aging parents, they're slammed, wall to wall, but they still want to engage with their hobby one night a week, without having to spend, 20 hours prepping a session. So I try to take some of that pressure off game masters and let them know that they don't have to do that. Like I said, I also have the Dice Geeks Insider, which is my newsletter where people can subscribe. And every Friday, I send out some cool stuff. I talk about mainly movies from like the 80s and 90s because I'm stuck in the past apparently. But
Best era.
I'll use those to kind of illustrate some points about role playing games or how you can use certain scenes and stuff. And I talk about that in my book as well. How you can just take certain scenes or plots or plot points or scenarios from movies and just put them right into your game, and people will never even know that you're playing through Conan the Barbarian or anything like that. You just won't even know. So that's another place that people can go to. But yeah, mainly, dicegeeks.com is where you can find everything, the Dice Geeks Insider, and then, yeah, the new book, The Prepared Player.
Okay, cool. Well, do you got anything else, Andrea?
I'm good at this stage. Anyway, we'll hit a second session.
Yeah, we
Yeah,
definitely got to do
absolutely.
more. There's still a lot more to dive into, especially with all your sort of expertise on the whole marketing aspect of this, or the really like just the business of how all this works. We can get more into detail next time, even though you did a
Yeah.
really good job of explaining all the details already. But I know that there's more that as I do some more prep work that we can expand upon. So
Yeah.
with that, I'll let you go. Thanks a lot for doing this. And so basically I will probably have this release in about 2 weeks. And I'll give you the links and stuff and all that. And then I'll try to give it to you ahead of time. Do you
Mhm.
have a YouTube channel to where we can like
Yeah.
collaborate on YouTube?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. It's just Dice Geeks. It's just at Dice Geeks. You should be able to find it.
I'll find you then and then we'll collaborate there and then
Yeah,
if you
absolutely.
put it in your newsletter, I'll put it in our newsletter and we'll
Yeah.
we'll try to pump it
Mhm.
up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Heck yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I
take
have a
it
ton of
easy.
questions for you guys too, because the Kickstarter whole piece, and then obviously some of your film work, Max, and really fascinating stuff. I'd love to talk more. So absolutely.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely yeah, that's the thing is sometimes yeah, there's almost too much and we'll all go on tangents, but as we do more of these we'll get a lot more familiar with each other and it won't be so much like explain to me your career. We will like go back and forth. Right now we're establishing sort of our regulars and who has the knowledge base to maintain regular conversation and you're definitely on the list there. So
Okay.
I'll definitely set something up in a few more months and we'll keep this going.
Okay. All right. Sounds great.
Nice meeting you, Matt.
Yeah. Pleasure to meet you too.